Hey guys, K2's Retro Workshop. Today we're going over the entire Macintosh Classic line. The machines represented here are most of what I would consider my Compact Mac collection. I've got a Performa 200 up over here that hasn't been restored yet, but that's basically this guy with a different name badge on it and a ton of hours. That'll be a restoration video for the future if I ever get to it. I think it's been on the shelf for like 2 years now. Anyway, and the Color Classic, I have 2 of them. The other one I have shown in previous videos more recently on the channel. The Classic here has been taken back to stock form for this particular review that we're doing. We will definitely be doing a second part that is just the Color Classic and what it is stock versus what it can be even just plug and play. So we'll go over all of that then. So let's go over what all of these have in common, other than the name. The name actually tells you a lot about these. The name Classic, while that's great for cars and stuff like that, when it came to computers in the 90s, when technology was speeding ahead faster than you could buy a new machine, that's not exactly a good thing, right? This guy especially, we'll get to it, but they all have 1.4 meg floppy support. I believe the Classic is the only one in the group that also supports 800K disks. But yeah, they all have 1.4 meg floppy support, which is really nice if you're taking an image off of the internet and you just want to burn an image to a disk real quick, or write an image, I know it's not a CD, and throw it in, then there you go. They all have internal SCSI, normal ADB ports. They're all at risk of battery bombs. They all need full recaps when you get them. You might be able to get away with just the logic board and stuff, but I have had that fishy capacitor smell on every one of the caps that came out of all 3 of these machines. So you definitely want to do a full recap. I don't always recommend that, but for this case, that's what you want. But that's where most of the similarity between the 3 ends. So let's talk about the Classic. The Classic has a 68,000 processor at 8 megahertz. It has a maximum of 4 megs of RAM. Now on this machine, to get 4 megs of RAM, you need one of these. The only expansion port on that motherboard is for this memory adapter. And you've got a meg on board, a meg here, and you can put 2 1 megabyte SIMs in here. That's the only expansion you have on that machine. It's a pretty reliable machine. It's not the quickest, but if you're happy with an SE or a Plus or a 512K, 128K, any of those, this is not a bad machine. But it is the slowest of what we're working with here, and it does play games. So surprisingly enough, things like Missile Command and Oregon Trail play just fine, but you can even play something like Spectre. Shockingly enough, it will do 3D gaming. And once it finally loads here, I'll show you. But this is a very unique Mac in that it has a built-in ROM disk. So even without a hard drive, you can press a key combination, I believe it's Control Option XO during boot up, and it will boot into the ROM disk. And this ROM disk is nice because you can use it for troubleshooting or even just use it as the system disk. As long as you have the ability to write floppy disks, you can go online and get an image, pop it in here, and play whatever you want. So we're going to switch, yeah, we'll leave it on vector, and we'll hit play here. These are the, we don't really care about the thing there. You can see it plays, but it's all wireframe. It's not exactly the fastest game in the world, but it is somewhat playable. This is actually really hard for this machine, and it's surprising that it even works in the first place. Oh, there's that tank. Yeah, so you can only do this in vector format. If you try to do filled, it's much slower. It just can't do it. But yeah, it'll play that. And you saw how slow that was to load. And it's a good machine, but in my workshop, this is the least used of the classics that I've got here, and it doesn't get booted up very often. It gets taken to meets and stuff, and that's the most action it sees, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, let's go ahead and we'll leave this guy on, and we'll move on to the Classic 2. So the Classic 2 has a 68030 processor at 16 megahertz. So we have double the clock speed of this guy, but that 68030 is on a 16-bit data bus, just like this guy. The equivalent of, this is more akin to a 286 at 8 megahertz, and this would be a 386 SX at 16 megahertz, to give you a bit of a comparison on the PC side as to what we're looking at here. The Classic 2 has an expansion port, but it's an FPU ROM expansion port, not a memory expansion port. This board actually has slots in it for you to add memory. And it has a 10 megabyte limit as opposed to a 4 megabyte limit. This is a much more capable machine. However, these machines have seen a lot more action. When the Classic came out, it was a bit long in the tooth, even in 1991. Imagine buying a 286 at 8 megahertz in 1991. No. You even had 486s on the market by that point. So yeah, this was mostly an educational machine. I remember using one of these in an elementary school for typing and such. The slow refresh of the screen is very reminiscent of the time. But this guy doesn't necessarily have that bad. You can see a significant difference here in just moving this screen, how quickly this refreshes over this. But it's not all rosy. If we go into the games folder here and I pull up Glypha, let's do the original one, why not? Ooh, censor that for YouTube. We can see on here that, let me go to configure controls and just set it to the mouse. Now, notice when I'm clicking to flap the bird here to fly around, it glitches a little bit. And it actually makes Glypha almost impossible to play on the Classic 2, because every time, I think the sound's muted too, because every time it is. Alright. Fail. Let me change that. Turns out it wasn't configured to have sound on in the game. But if we go here to begin our game, it plays okay, but notice how it glitches every time I click. The data bus is getting a little bit overwhelmed there. So what's happening is when I click, it's got to move a lot at once. And the video buffer on these black and white Macs is actually in system RAM. So not only do we have half the bandwidth from the processor to the system memory, but we're sharing that bandwidth with the video ASIC that has to draw everything on the screen. And this machine suffers a lot for that. So Glypha, there's a few other games that you really just can't play very well because of that. And, you know, it kind of is what it is. Everything else, like Crystal Quest or games like that, they all play fine. It browses the internet fine and stuff like that. And the lack of expansion on either of these machines isn't really that big of a deal these days, because you throw a blue SCSI V2 in here and bam, you have connectivity. Throwing an Ethernet card in one of these, it's slow as heck anyway, so who cares if the Dynaport emulation is slow? Whatever. So, yeah, that's the Classic and the Classic 2. If you have two of these, you can make one working one. They're so close to one another. The motherboard difference between these two is literally an audio input port difference. That's it. Almost everything else can be swapped between the two, assuming it's a later generation Classic. I think the yoke connector changed in the first year on these guys. But between these two machines, everything is swappable. Contrast that to the Color Classic. So while these two are pretty compatible, this machine is completely different. If you have a broken Color Classic and a broken Classic 2, you've got two broken Classics. Nothing can be swapped over. The Color Classic has the color screen, but it's also got a modular motherboard build, and it's basically one of these guys. This is the motherboard that's normally in this machine, and I'm not going to go over this right now. I'm just showing you the motherboard. We'll cover that in part 2, where it's just the Color Classic. But the Color Classic is arguably the most useful of the group. I will be honest, I went into this video expecting to totally crap on this machine, because I remember just how bad the Color Classic is stock. But after playing with it with the stock motherboard back in it, there may have been something wrong with that other motherboard that I got rid of originally out of this machine, because this is a surprisingly capable machine. On paper, it's exactly the same as this guy. But remember earlier we talked about the video buffer? On this guy, it's separate, because there's a lot more data for color. So the memory bandwidth that we had to share with the video ASIC on this machine is on dedicated memory in here. We do lose a couple of things with that. This has a dual frame buffer, so you can update things behind the scenes and then switch to it so the user doesn't have to watch redraw, that this one doesn't have. And that's not to say this is perfect. I have an example that I will pull up here. Let's open Spectre on this one, and you can see how much faster it loads here than here. When you have to start drawing quickly onto this screen, you quickly run into the 16-bit data bus that this has, because the burden of color is 8 times what it is for black and white. 1 pixel means 1 bit over here, but we have to use 8 bits to build a 256 color pixel over here. So we move 8 times the data over here. And if we just hit play here, play. I think it's this. Oh, it's a different version of Spectre. I was going to say, I think it was the same version, and it still didn't do the spinny over there. But you can see that it plays really well here until you start getting close, and then you can see redraw and the frame. Oh, no, that's not helpful. And you can see it slow down as it tries to draw that side of the frame. Let's try not running into one. There you go. And yeah, it has trouble. So let's turn around here and try not to die. But it's very playable, and it's in color. It looks great. So the video thing, this is a pretty capable machine as far as gaming goes. I'm really surprised by that. Another one of my favorites, this game, Arashi, is perfectly playable on this machine. There is No issue whatsoever playing this game. I love playing this game too. And it's nice it meets because it can just be running in the background. It runs a little demo. Let's just stick with that one. Hope you guys can see this. Kill these guys before they come up here. Now, the goal of this game is to clear the green bars at the bottom so that you have an escape route when the level's cleared. You like that Star Trek motion picture warp sound effect right there? So that game plays great. No problem playing it. Oh, yeah. Alright, so we exited the game there. Now, I want you to watch, because this next game that I'm going to open is the perfect example of this machine having trouble on the video side. This game has an opening sequence where it wipes in and then wipes out. You can see that as the wipe comes in from the side, the more of the screen that has to be refreshed, the slower it gets. You can see how slow that is. And I'll show you in the next part where we discuss the Color Classic a little more, how much of an improvement you get just going to a slightly faster motherboard than this one. But the Color Classic has crazy upgrade potential. It's a decent machine, and the color makes it just infinitely more useful than either of these guys. And front controls are nice too for volume and everything, although I found that volume and brightness don't really change during a game. So, but as far as when you're in the game here, this game plays pretty well. And I'm spending more time on this one because it's more fun to actually use. But we can pick up our bomb here, place it there, and there you go. This game's pretty fun. And it's a little slower than some other machines when it's doing the scrolling bit that it has to do. But, again, it's really not bad. With some mods and everything, this machine can be fun. But that's the Classic series for you. Each one of them is hobbled in some way. This has a PDS slot on it, so you can add Ethernet and everything to it. And like I said, but with Blue SCSI and stuff and the Dynaport emulation, that's almost unnecessary anymore, and it's almost a hindrance. If you're networking more than one of these together, use a phone net or directly connect the two with local talk. It's so easy. These two are a lot faster. I believe there's a speed limit on the 68,000 processors for local talk, so that guy will slow a phone net ring down. But these two, they're pretty quick. That's the Classic series for you. Hobbled in one way or another. Arguably the Classic isn't. As far as the 68,000 machine goes, it's actually really good. But they all have their ups and downs. It used to be price for these two was great, but it's gone up a lot lately. The Color Classic's an expensive machine. It's useful for the most part stock, but to have a really good 68K machine requires some upgrades. And we'll talk about that in part 2. If you have any of these or any games you recommend to play on these, anything like that, questions, comments, go ahead and leave them below. I will see you for part 2, where we are talking about the potential behind the plastic of this guy. Have a great day.